I've been with Mark for 3 years now, and he's been at his current company for about 8 months. We'll call him Mark, though that's actually his real name. I don't really care about protecting him anymore. I'd never met any of his coworkers until that night at the bar, but there was one in particular he talked about constantly. We'll call her Amy. He'd been doing extra work with her, staying late to help her with spreadsheets, teaching her the new accounting software, even going in on weekends to fix database issues she was struggling with. I was never really concerned because he painted such a specific picture of her. A woman in her mid-50s who was terrified of being left behind by technology. Someone who reminded him of his aunt, just trying to make it to retirement without getting fired. He'd come home and tell me these stories about how she'd accidentally deleted entire folders or couldn't figure out how to send an attachment, and I'd feel guilty for even having a flicker of jealousy. However, one night while doing laundry, I found a receipt in the pocket of his dress pants, the nice ones he only wears for important meetings. It was from a cocktail bar downtown, dated 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. 2 espresso martinis. $34. I stared at it for a long time because Mark had told me that night he was staying late to help Amy fix a printer issue. But the office building closes at 7 p.m. The security system locks automatically. This really concerned me. So, the next morning over coffee, I casually asked about it. He barely looked up from his phone and said Amy had been so stressed about almost losing a major file that he'd offered to grab a quick drink with her to calm her down. You know how older people get with technology, he laughed. She was practically having a panic attack. I thought it was weird that a quick drink lasted until midnight, and I expressed my discomfort. He got defensive and said I was being controlling, that he was just being a good colleague to someone who needed support. He even said, "You'd love Amy if you met her. She's like everybody's work mom." That should have been my first clue. Why would I need to meet her if everything was so innocent? So I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. The following Thursday, he texted me at 8:03 p.m., saying Amy needed help with a presentation for the next morning, and he'd probably be another 2 hours. I tracked his location, we'd always shared it for safety, and saw he wasn't at the office. He was at that same cocktail bar. I got dressed, put on makeup, and drove downtown. The whole drive I was convincing myself I was being crazy, that I'd walk in and see him sitting across from some sweet grandmother type with reading glasses, and I'd feel like an idiot. I rehearsed my apology in my head. But when I walked through that door and my eyes adjusted to the dim, amber lighting, I didn't see a woman with gray hair struggling to understand Excel. I saw a stunning blonde in a body-hugging dress, mid-20s at most, leaning into my boyfriend's space with her hand resting on his face. Their foreheads were almost touching. 2 wine glasses sat between them on the bar. I froze. My hand went to my chest because I legitimately couldn't breathe. Everything he'd ever told me about Amy, the age, the struggles, the work mom energy, it was all a lie. And in that moment, standing in the doorway watching them, I realized this wasn't just about another woman. This was about the fact that he'd invented an entire fictional person to keep me from asking questions. The whole night I just watched from the shadows near the entrance. The way he touched her hand when he talked, the way she threw her head back laughing at something he said, the way he looked at her, like she was the most captivating person in the room. He used to look at me like that. When did he stop? I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and took a photo. The angle was perfect. You could see, both of them clearly. The intimacy undeniable. I sent it to him with no message, just the photo. Then I added, "Hope the software is working now." I blocked him before I even left the parking lot. Before we begin, tell us in the comments from which city are you watching. And at the end, do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Looking back, I realize Mark started building the myth of old Amy the very first week she joined his department. It was so subtle at first. He'd come home from work and mention her casually over dinner. "There's this new woman in accounting, Amy. She's really sweet, but totally overwhelmed by the software." He'd shake his head with this mixture of pity and amusement, like he was talking about his grandmother trying to figure out her iPhone. "She keeps asking me to show her the same things over and over. I think she's afraid they'll let her go if she can't keep up." And because I'm apparently an idiot, I felt sorry for her, for this woman who didn't even exist the way he described her. The late nights started about a month in. "Amy's really struggling with the quarterly reports," he'd text me around 6 p.m. "I'm going to stay and walk her through it. Don't wait up." I send back a heart emoji and feel proud that my boyfriend was such a good person, so patient with someone who was probably just trying to make it to retirement with her dignity intact. He'd come home at 10 sous or 11 p.m. looking exhausted, and I'd have dinner warming in the oven. He'd tell me stories about how Amy had accidentally deleted an entire spreadsheet, or how she'd called him in a panic because she couldn't remember her password for the third time that week. "She's just so anxious about everything," he'd say, and I'd rub his shoulders and tell him he was doing a good thing. The really sick part? He made me complicit. He'd frame these late nights as acts of compassion, like he was single-handedly keeping this poor woman employed. "She told me today that she's terrified of being replaced by someone younger," he said once with genuine-sounding concern. "Can you imagine being that age and feeling like you're obsolete?" I couldn't imagine it. But I could imagine being the girlfriend who got jealous of a struggling older woman and made her boyfriend choose between his career advancement and her insecurity. So I smiled and told him I was proud of him for being so kind. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every story was an insurance policy against my suspicion. Mark didn't just lie about Amy's age. He created an entire fictional character with a backstory so detailed I should have known something was wrong. She had grandchildren, apparently. 2 of them. A boy and a girl, 7 and 9 years old, who lived 3 states away with her daughter. Mark would come home and tell me how Amy had shown him photos of them on her phone, how she'd gotten teary-eyed talking about not seeing them enough. "She FaceTimed them during lunch today," he told me once. It was actually kind of heartbreaking. The little boy kept asking when Grandma was coming to visit. I remember feeling genuinely sad for her. This lonely woman, working late into her years, separated from her family, struggling to keep up in a world that had left her behind. The technology stories were the most elaborate. Marky would come home with these detailed anecdotes about Amy's supposed incompetence that were almost comedic. She'd apparently sent an email to the entire company instead of just her department, panicking about a personal doctor's appointment. She'd somehow managed to print 200 copies of the same document because she kept hitting print, thinking nothing was happening. She'd called Mark in tears once because she thought she'd broken the internet when the Wi-Fi went down. "She asked me today if the Twitter was the same as email," he said one night, laughing affectionately. "She's terrified of doing anything wrong on the computer. She writes everything down in this little notebook first, like she's going to forget between her desk and mine." He even mentioned her appearance in ways that reinforced the image. How she'd shown up to a client meeting with her reading glasses perched on top of her head, forgetting they were there. How she always wore these old lady cardigans that reminded him of his Aunt Margaret. How she'd asked him if her outfit was too young for the office party. Every detail was a brick in the wall he was building between my suspicion and his lies, and it worked. When I pictured Amy, I saw someone's grandmother, someone harmless, someone who needed protection, not someone I needed protection from. The cruelest part. He made me feel guilty for even wondering. The first time I really noticed something was off, Mark was getting ready for another late night with Amy. And he spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror. This was a man who normally threw on whatever was clean and barely glanced at his reflection on the way out the door. But that Tuesday evening, he changed his shirt 3 times. The first was too casual, the second had a stain he swore he'd just noticed, and the third, a fitted navy button-down I'd bought him for our anniversary that he'd never worn, was apparently finally appropriate for the office. "It's just work," I said, watching him from the doorway of our bedroom. "I thought you were helping Amy with spreadsheets." He didn't even look at me. "We might grab dinner after. The whole team. I should look presentable." But he'd told me 20 minutes earlier it would just be him and Amy working late. The story was already shifting, and I was already making excuses for why that was normal. Then there was the cologne. Mark owned exactly 1 bottle of cologne that his mother had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. It had been sitting on the bathroom counter, mostly full, gathering dust. Suddenly, he was wearing it every time he had these late-night mentoring sessions. The bathroom would smell like expensive cedar and bergamot when I'd go in after he left. "Since when do you wear cologne to teach someone Excel?" I asked him once, trying to keep my tone light, joking. He got defensive immediately. "I wear it every day. You've just never noticed." But I had noticed. I'd noticed that he only wore it on Amy. Nights. I'd noticed that he'd started keeping breath mints in his car. I'd noticed that the late nights at the office seemed to require more effort than our actual date nights, which had dwindled to Netflix and takeout on the couch. One Thursday, I watched him iron his pants before leaving. Iron them. Mark, who once wore the same hoodie for 4 days straight during a work-from-home week. "You're really going all out for spreadsheet training," I said. He kissed me on the forehead without meeting my eyes. "Just trying to set a good example for the new people." But his hands smelled like a department store, and his smile didn't reach his face. I wasn't snooping. I need to be clear about that, because for weeks afterward I kept telling myself I wasn't that kind of girlfriend. I was doing laundry on a Saturday morning, the mundane ritual of checking pockets before throwing his work pants in the wash. Loose change, occasionally a forgotten pen, once a crumpled sticky note with a meeting. Reminder. Normal things. But that morning my fingers closed around a folded piece of paper that felt different. Slick. Thermal printed. The kind of receipt that fades if you leave it in the sun. I unfolded it without thinking. Sapphire Lounge, it said across the top in elegant script. Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. 2 espresso martinis, $34 with tip. My brain tried to make it make sense. Tuesday? That was 3 days ago. Mark had texted me that night saying Amy needed help fixing a critical printer issue before a big client meeting the next morning. He'd said he'd probably be at the office until 9 or 10 at the latest. I'd gone to bed at 10:30 and he'd crawled in beside me sometime after midnight, whispering that I was right. He needed to set better boundaries with work. But this receipt was from 11:47 p.m., and it wasn't from a 24-hour diner near the office or a coffee shop. It was from Sapphire Lounge, that upscale cocktail bar downtown with the velvet booths and the craft drink menu and the dim lighting that made everyone look like they were in a perfume commercial. 2 espresso martinis. Not coffee. Not a quick bite to eat after fixing a printer. 2 expensive cocktails at nearly midnight with someone he'd told me was a technologically challenged woman in her 50s who just needed a little extra help. I stood there in our laundry room holding that receipt, and something clicked in my brain. A detail I'd known, but never connected. Mark's office building has automated security. The doors lock at 7:00 45 p.m. sharp. You need a security badge to get back in after hours, and you have to sign in with the night guard, and there's a whole system because of insurance liability. There was no printer to fix at the office at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday because the office was locked. Had been for almost 5 hours. I spent 4 days staring at that receipt, trying to logic my way into an innocent explanation that didn't exist. Maybe it was a team outing and he forgot to mention it. Maybe the timestamp was wrong. Maybe he'd grabbed drinks with a male coworker and just happened to order 2 of the same thing. Maybe I was manufacturing a crisis out of thin air because I was insecure and controlling and exactly the kind of girlfriend I'd always promised myself I'd never become. Thursday evening, he texted me at 8:15 p.m. Amy's freaking out about tomorrow's presentation, staying late to help her polish it. Love you. I stared at that message for a full minute. Then I opened our location sharing app, the one we'd set up 2 years ago for safety, so we'd always know the other person got home okay. The little blue dot that represented Mark wasn't at his office building downtown. It was at Sapphire Lounge. I didn't think. I just moved, changed out of my sweatpants into jeans and a black sweater, put on makeup, not a lot, just enough that I wouldn't look like I'd been crying, even though I hadn't been. Not yet. Grabbed my keys and drove downtown, narrating my own defense the entire way. I'm not being crazy. I'm just checking. I'm allowed to check. And when I walk in there and see him sitting with some older woman going over presentation slides, I'll feel like an idiot. But at least I'll know. At least I'll know I can trust my own instincts, and my instincts will have been wrong, and that's fine. That's healthy. That's what people in secure relationships do. They trust, but verify, right? The parking garage near the bar was nearly empty. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, practicing my apology. I'm so sorry. I know this looks insane. No, that wasn't right. Mark, I found the receipt and I just needed to see worse. Hi, I was in the neighborhood. I sounded guilty. I sounded like the villain in my own story. I got out of the car before I could talk myself out of it and walked toward the amber glow of the bar's entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs, still half convinced I was about to prove myself catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. The door to Sapphire Lounge was heavier than I expected, and when I pulled it open, I was hit immediately with warmth and noise and the smell of expensive liquor and perfume. My eyes needed a moment to adjust to the dim, amber lighting, and in that moment, I was still living in the world where I might be wrong, where Mark might turn around from a booth and wave me over with a sheepish grin, sitting across from a gray-haired woman with reading glasses and a stack of presentation notes, and I'd laugh at my own paranoia, and we'd all have a drink, and this would become a funny story we'd tell at dinner parties. Then my vision cleared. Mark was sitting at the bar on a dark wooden stool, and there was a woman beside him. But she wasn't gray-haired. She wasn't in her 50s. She wasn't wearing reading glasses or a cardigan, or anything that remotely resembled the person he'd described for 8 months. She was young, mid-20s at most, long blonde, hair that caught the light like honey, a tight beige dress that showed off a figure that had never struggled with anything, let alone Excel spreadsheets. And she wasn't sitting across from him reviewing slides. She was leaning into his space. Her hand was on his face, fingertips resting gently against his cheek, and their foreheads were almost touching. 2 wine glasses sat between them on the bar, the liquid inside glowing amber in the low light. He was looking at her the way people look at each other in movies right before they kiss, like she was the only person in the room, in the world, like nothing else existed or mattered. My hand went to my chest because I physically could not breathe. The air had been sucked out of my lungs and replaced with something sharp and suffocating. This was Amy. This was the woman who supposedly reminded him of his aunt, the grandmother who missed her grandkids, the technologically incompetent older woman who needed his patience and kindness and late-night mentoring sessions. She was none of those things, and he'd known that the entire time. I stood there in the shadows near the entrance, frozen, watching them exist in their intimate little bubble. Other patrons moved around me, blurred and irrelevant. The bartender wiped down glasses. Someone laughed at a nearby table. But all I could see was Mark's hand reaching for hers, the way she smiled at something he said, the casual intimacy of two people who'd done this before. Many times before. I couldn't leave, even though every instinct screamed at me to run, so I stayed in the shadows and watched him touch her, the way he used to touch me. His thumb was tracing slow circles on the back of her hand. I recognized that gesture immediately because it used to be ours, the thing he'd do absent-mindedly when we sat together at restaurants, when we talked about our days, when we were just existing in each other's presence and didn't need words. He hadn't done that to me in months. Maybe. Longer. When had he stopped? I couldn't even remember. She said something and threw her head back, laughing, and his face lit up with this genuine delight I hadn't seen directed at me since... God, since when? He looked at her like she was fascinating, like every word out of her mouth was worth leaning in closer to hear. When was the last time he'd leaned in to hear me? Last week I'd told him about getting a potential promotion at work, and he'd said, "That's great, babe," without looking up from his phone. But here, now, with her, his phone was face down on the bar, forgotten. She had his complete attention. He tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her neck for just a second, and I felt something break inside my chest. That gesture, that specific tender gesture that used to make my heart race when we first started dating. He'd done it on our third date, and I'd fallen a little bit in love with him right then. I couldn't remember the last time he'd touched my face at all. She shifted closer and rested her head briefly on his shoulder, and he didn't pull away. He let her stay there, his hand moving to her lower back, in a way that was protective and possessive and intimate. The kind of touch that said, "You're mine and I'm yours, and everyone here can see it." We'd gone to dinner 2 nights ago and sat across from each other in silence, both scrolling our phones, and when the waiter asked if we wanted dessert, Mark had said, "We should probably just get the check without asking me." But here he was, ordering another round of drinks, in no hurry to leave, giving this woman everything I'd been begging for, without realizing I was begging. My hands were steadier than I expected when I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. I stepped slightly to the left, getting a better angle, making sure the shot would be clear. Mark's face in profile, his hands still on her lower back, her blonde hair catching the amber light, the wine glasses, between them. The body language that told the whole story without a single word needing to be spoken. I zoomed in just enough that there would be no ambiguity, no way for him to claim the photo was misleading or taken out of context. I took 3 photos. The second one was perfect. Then I opened our text thread. The one where his last message, sent 90 minutes ago, still said, "Amy's freaking out about tomorrow's presentation, staying late to help her polish it. Love you." I attached the photo. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for maybe 5 seconds while I decided whether to say anything at all. Part of me wanted to send it without comment, let the image speak for itself, but I needed him to know that I knew. That I'd known all along, somewhere deep down, and he'd made me feel crazy for trusting my own instincts. I typed, "Hope the software is working now." Sent. For exactly 3 seconds, I watched the message shift from delivered to read. I saw the typing indicator appear immediately. Those 3 dots that meant he was panicking, scrambling to construct whatever lie he thought might salvage this. I didn't wait to see what it would be. I blocked his number. Then I blocked him on every social media platform we shared. Email, Venmo, everything. Scorched earth in under 30 seconds. My hands were still steady. I felt weirdly calm, like I was watching myself from outside my body, making decisions with perfect clarity. I glanced up one last time at the bar. He was staring at his phone now, his face drained of color even in the dim lighting. She was leaning over, trying to see what was wrong, her hand on his arm, concern in her expression. He looked up and scanned the bar frantically, but I was already moving toward the exit. I didn't run. I walked slowly, deliberately, with my shoulders back and my head high. The heavy door closed behind me and the cold night air hit my face like a baptism. Here's what I learned that night, standing in a bar. Parking garage at 9:47 p.m. with mascara-stained cheeks and a clarity I'd never experienced before. If someone has to lie about the details of a person, they are already lying about the nature of the relationship. Mark didn't just fail to mention that Amy was young and attractive. He constructed an elaborate fiction, grandchildren, reading glasses, technology struggles, the whole identity of a woman who didn't exist, specifically to keep me from asking the questions I had every right to ask. That's not protection. That's not privacy. That's premeditated gaslighting with a character arc. And I let him do it because I'd confused trust with blind faith. I thought being a good girlfriend meant never questioning, never verifying, never listening to that quiet voice in my head that said, "Something feels wrong here." I thought suspicion was a character flaw I needed to overcome, that checking his location or noticing his cologne made me toxic and controlling. But trust isn't a blank check. It's not something you hand over on day one of a relationship and never revisit. Real trust is earned through consistency between words and actions. It's built on transparency, not elaborate cover stories about fictional grandmothers. And when someone weaponizes your trust, when they use your desire to be the cool girlfriend as permission to lie directly to your face, that's not love. That's manipulation with a smile. Mark didn't cheat because I wasn't enough. He cheated because he wanted both of us and thought he was clever enough to manage it. The age lie wasn't a small detail he fudged. It was a calculated strategy to make me feel guilty for even wondering. Every story about Amy's technology struggles was insurance against my intuition. And my intuition was right. It was right the first time I noticed the cologne. It was right when I found the receipt. It was right every single time that voice whispered, "This doesn't add up." And I talked myself out of listening to it, so here's my lesson. Learned the hard way in an amber-lit bar. Your intuition isn't your enemy. Your partner's need for privacy shouldn't require you to ignore your own eyes. And if someone's story about another person keeps changing, getting more detailed, more sympathetic, more elaborate, they're not protecting privacy. They're protecting lies. Trust yourself first. Everyone else has to earn it. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of this journey from blind trust to devastating clarity? What was your most powerful moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know which scene hit you the hardest. Was it the receipt, the cologne, or that moment in the bar when everything shattered? On a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story of betrayal and self-discovery? And if you connected with Caught in the Act, I Met the Coworker. My BF said was way older. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to receive more emotional, dramatic, and empowering stories like this one. Leave a like if you're proud of how she handled that final text message. Comment which lesson resonated with you the most. Trusting your intuition, recognizing gaslighting, or knowing that trust must be earned, not given blindly. We will see you in the next story because everyone deserves the truth, and everyone deserves to trust themselves first.